STEM and technology education. He's a professor of education and the director of graduate research in the School of Education at Auckland University in Perth, Western Australia. Apart from Australia, he worked and studied in a number of African, Indian Ocean countries, in New Zealand and the United States. His current research interests include STEMs, mentoring teacher, PCK, and electronic assessment and performance. He's the editor of Swinger Contemporary Essays in Technology Education series, and is on editorial board of 6 professional journals. He's the author and contributed over 250 publications, and is elected to be the International Technology and Engineering Education Association Academy of Fellows for the prominent in the profession. John's most recent award is from the U.S. Council of Technology and Engineering Teacher Education as the Technology and Engineering Teacher Educator of the Year. He the first ever non-U.S. recipient of the award. To me, John is a great supervisor, a very good friend, and a super cool fishing coach. And today, John going to share with us about 21st century skills and STEM education. Let us give a warm welcome to Professor John Williams.
Thanks very much, Nung. It's a bit hard to concentrate on something serious looking at that picture.
Okay, so that's why I should stop sharing now, so that you can focus on serious talk.
It brings back some good memories when we were at Waikato together. We used to take the postgraduate students fishing for a day, and that picture was one of those days. So thanks for that memory. Thanks for that memory. Okay, so shall I start?
Yes, please.
Okay, is that okay?
Yes, we can see your screen in PowerPoint presenting mode now.
Okay, good. All right, well, thanks for that welcome, Nung. It's nice to see some familiar faces amongst the audience today. And links to New Zealand are hold very fond memories for me. I spent 6 years at Waikato, and it was a very pleasant time. So it's nice to retain at least some of those links. So thanks for the invitation, Nung, and it's nice to talk to you all today. Before we start, just let me give you a little orientation to where I'm coming from, both conceptually and geographically. So geographically first, this is the city of Perth. Probably many of you have been here, I'm sure. The city is on the Swan River, which runs into the ocean. So Perth's about as far away as you can get from New Zealand, but still be in Australia, which is unfortunate in a sense, but nevertheless, that's the way the geography is. So not far from the city is Curtin University. Can you see my cursor, Nung? Okay, so this area here is Curtin University, and there you can see the city in the background. So it's not too far from Perth City. One of the issues that we've had on campus after COVID was, of course, getting students to come back to class. During those couple of years, students got used to distance education and working and studying when they wanted to. So there's been a sort of a campus beautification program to try and attract students back to campus, which seems to be working. So we have things on campus like this hammock hotel, where students can park themselves for part of the day. We also have concerts on campus to try and attract students to come to class. So for some students that's working, but of course for others they're happy with distance education. And this is the School of Education building on Curtin University campus. This is the building that I work out of, and also within this building we have the STEM education discipline group. So now I'm sort of moving to conceptually where I'm coming from. So the work within this group involves quite a few staff, and in STEM they work both within a particular discipline plus also in an integrated way. And from that discipline group, we conduct research, professional development, we design the relevant units and supervise postgraduate students. So this is the concept of STEM that we use within our research group. So you can see the separate disciplines of STEM, the science, maths, technology and engineering we put together because we think there's a lot of similarities between those two areas. So we have people working in sort of these segments of the diagram, the discipline areas, but also the cross-discipline areas. And then in the center, there are some people working in the integrated STEM area, which involves the 3 disciplines or 4 disciplines. And then that happens within a digital technologies context, where digital technologies are used to enhance pedagogy or content. So that's our sort of conceptual frame of the nature of STEM. Within that group, we have research clusters in technology and engineering, science, maths, integrated STEM, and digital technologies. So groups of people working in those areas, both teaching and research. You might be interested from a university perspective in the areas that we offer STEM study in. So in both our Bachelor of Education and our Master of Teaching, there's opportunity for STEM specializations for primary and secondary teachers. And then in the postgraduate area, we have a STEM specialization in our Master of Education and also in our Doctor of Education, which involves some coursework. So that's the sort of the teaching structure, if you like, related to STEM in our university. Okay, so let's talk about STEM itself first, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about 21st century skills, and then we'll kind of put the two together. So it's quite difficult to define STEM because it has different meanings in different contexts. So you talk about it in primary school or middle school or high school, and in each of those contexts, it takes on quite a different form. So of course in primary school where teachers, one teacher typically teaches most of the curriculum, STEM is sort of a really natural thing to do, the integration of those areas, and an easy thing to do. Middle school or lower secondary school is the area, I think, where most of the STEM development is taking place, because there's a little bit of flexibility with the curriculum there. Unlike high school, which is very discipline oriented, and oriented towards university examinations. And I think this is the same in New Zealand as well. And then you talk about STEM at university. It's not really integrated at all. It's divided into the separate disciplines. So a definition of STEM is going to be different in each of those contexts. And also the meaning differs depending on who's talking about it. So the social awareness of what STEM is quite different from an educator's awareness, and politicians again have a different meaning when they begin talking about STEM. So in all of those contexts, there's a slightly different understanding of what constitutes STEM. But for this presentation, I'm really going to be talking mostly about integrated STEM in school, the combining of the disciplines in mainly middle school. So that's my context. If we look at the goals of STEM, there's many of them, and they come from all of those groups that I've mentioned before. They come from politicians who kind of have a strong influence over the curriculum. They come from educators who are more interested in student development and student needs. So the initial implementation of STEM was really as a result of the need for countries to be globally competitive. So it originated, the notion of STEM originated in the States. And it was this notion of America falling behind other countries that led to thinking about the importance of STEM. So global competitiveness is one of the goals, one of the rationales. Related to that, of course, is the needs of the workforce. So we needed more scientists and more engineers. So how do we do that? Well, maybe the focus on STEM would result in that. Need more people pursuing STEM careers, also related to that notion of competitiveness. Research had revealed that the attitudes towards STEM were negative in some areas. So there was a need to, one of the goals is to improve a more positive attitude towards STEM. So emphasize both the integrated STEM and STEM, so the science, technology, engineering, and maths studies. Particularly maths, for example, I think it's the same in New Zealand. But in Australia, very few students take year 11 and 12 maths now. So that's a concern in terms of social needs. In workforce readiness, the connections between the disciplines is one of the goals. From a student's perspective, enhancing their STEM literacy, and then finally the development of 21st century skills, which we'll talk a little more about. So it's interesting that these goals are really sort of socio-economic, pre-vocational kinds of goals, unlike the other two goals, which are really more general and more oriented towards the individual student. So there's this complexity of goals going on in the STEM area. Some are related to each other, others are quite diverse. It's interesting that this development of goals has also been historical. So that list I have there is almost a dated list. So we began with that sort of big notion of global competitiveness and worked our way slowly towards thinking about, well, what are students going to get out of this? And hence we arrived at the notion of the relationship between STEM and 21st century skills. I'm using Australia as an example here, but I know there are documents in New Zealand which say exactly the same thing. So the Australian STEM School Education Strategy 2016 to 2026 has two main goals. Ensure that all students finish school with strong foundational knowledge in STEM and related skills, and ensure that students are inspired to take on more challenging STEM subjects. So you can see the correlation here between these statements and the list of goals that we just looked at. The question is why? Why do we want these goals? And the answer really is going back to that big notion of international competitiveness through innovative economic development. So the realization that for any country, and this is common thinking in America, in New Zealand, in Canada, in the UK, in Australia, a number of Asian countries, this concern about falling behind in our level of international competitiveness. So even though those previous goals, there they are again, are kind of related to student development, the rationale for them is really beyond that. It's sort of almost a socio-economic kind of rationale. So the primary drivers really of STEM in schools remain that socio-economic focus, increasing the return on investment and driving future prosperity and workforce planning. So it's quite clear that the broad rationale for STEM is a socio-economic and workforce goal. But the question is this enough for educators? And the answer is no, it's not really, because educators are most interested in our students' development. Of course, we have to address those big primary drivers, those socioeconomic issues, but we're most interested in individual student development. So achieving those socioeconomic goals, and I'm kind of going back to that list at the beginning again now, attitudes towards STEM, more students in STEM careers, more success studying STEM, enhancing disciplinary knowledge, making connections between the STEM disciplines. There's quite a bit of research to indicate that STEM is effective in these areas. Over the last probably 15 years now, the research is clearly indicating that STEM activities with students can achieve these goals. But again, we come back to the question, well, what about the students? So their attitudes are being more positive, more students are moving into STEM careers, presumably their disciplinary knowledge consequently is developing, they're making those connections. But, you know, is that really enough from an educator's perspective? And I would say that from our perspective as teachers and educators, what we're really interested is more of these types of goals. So we really are interested in personal individualized development. Are individual students, are we providing the opportunities for individual students to develop to their fullest potential? Are students developing the ability to transfer concepts between disciplines? There's lots of similarities between the 4 STEM disciplines, and we would want students to be able to apply concepts and skills that they've developed in one context into another context. Are we aware of the students' ways of knowing? In research, in science education research, there has been some research about how students learn, how they know scientific knowledge, but not so much in the other areas. Are they able to develop their representational fluency in each of these areas? What personal attributes are students developing? And coming back to the range of 21st century skills again. So from an educator's perspective, these are more the type of issues, I think, that we're interested in. But the problem is these goals are more difficult to research and to measure. It's easy to measure change of attitude, for example, because there are standardized attitude instruments available to do that measuring. But measuring something like the transferring of concepts between discipline areas, that's more complex. And so consequently, there's less research about what STEM can give to individual students as there is about how STEM can work towards those broader socioeconomic kinds of goals. So this statement, I think, is important, so I'll read it. The challenge for educators is to translate an ill-defined, politically charged, and narrowly utilitarian policy agenda of securing a future workforce into a valid and coherent curriculum that is of benefit to all students. So that statement is a reflection on the history of STEM. So it developed as a political agenda. It didn't develop from educators. So that's partly why some of it doesn't really make sense. But nevertheless, as educators, we're stuck with it because politicians have power over our curriculum. And so educators then have to translate that sort of policy agenda into something that's a benefit for students. Hence my division of those range of goals. Okay, let's talk a little bit about 21st century skills now. So I'll sort of park STEM for a moment and come back to that in a little while. Many people, of course, don't like the notion or the term of 21st century skills for a couple of reasons. One is that we're now well into the 21st century. So the term developed while we were still in the 20th century, and it's sort of continued. So people feel that that's a little bit passé now, and we need to come up with something better to describe these skills. Another critique of the term 21st century skills is that these are skills which have been important forever. They're not particularly new in terms of important skills for our students to develop. So given that critique, which we need to be aware of, I'm still going to continue using the term for now. It's most closely associated with the 4 C's, communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity. So most often when people refer to the 21st century skills, they're referring to the development of those attributes. However, I think this chart, this diagram is really nice because it expands significantly beyond just the focus on those 4 areas to really I guess, broaden the scope of 21st century skills into areas that maybe are more important, more relevant, more contemporary than just the focus on those 4 C's. And it's also more personal as well. You look at, for example, the hope and optimism box. We would want to develop hope and optimism within our students. And then below that, resilience. I mean, resilience is a feature that we would want to develop within our students. Empathy and global citizenship related to sustainability, of course, is another important attribute we would want to develop in our students. So I think when we think about 21st century skills, we need to think beyond just those 4 C areas of communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity. Not that they're not important, of course they are, as they always have been. I think the development of STEM, the development of socio-economic requirements in this century maybe have heightened the need for schooling to be aware of these skills than it has been in the past. So that's the type of scope of 21st century skills I think we should keep in mind. So going back to my initial list, and looking specifically at the last point on that list, 21st century skills, many people have changed that term into a reference to liquid skills. So, I mean, liquid has a kind of nice connotation in a sense, not very academic, I suppose, but they sort of, flow wherever the need is, wherever there's a vacuum, that's where the liquids flow. So that's sort of a nice connotation. Transverse skills is another term that's more commonly used for 21st century skills. And transverse, of course, refers to the applicability of those skills across a whole range of areas, both educational areas and life areas as well. So I think that either of those terms are probably more appropriate than 21st century skills, but we're kind of stuck with it. So let me look now at a little bit of the research that's been done relating STEM activities to the development of those transverse skills. And of course, there's no single piece of research which makes that link for us. But there's lots of research around that looks at STEM activities and particular outcomes for students. So first of all, FAN has done a lot of research related to STEM and in teaching engineering, introducing engineering, because of course it's not a common secondary school subject. Teaching engineering in secondary schools improved the aspect of higher order thinking in that particular research. Other research looked at again, higher order problem solving and the relationship between self-efficacy. So the research outcome was students feeling more efficacious in a STEM context resulted in a higher level of problem solving skill development. STEM impacts affecting the development of critical thinking as well. Another research found from a project that was done in a school. Some more specific research, a robotics competition was found to enhance both collaboration and communication. So robotics is often represented as a typical STEM activity. It's not really, I don't think, but nevertheless, people use robotics to say, well, we're doing STEM. A project with students on waste, how to deal with waste, was found to increase both their autonomy and their level of cooperation with each other. Some research by Han was quite interesting in that it indicated a significant direct effect between teacher self-efficacy and student social and interpersonal skill development. So this is particularly relevant probably for primary teachers, where often in the STEM and science and technology areas, they don't feel very efficacious because of their training and their focus in many schools on literacy and numeracy. Kind of leaves STEM out a little bit. So this research focused on the efficacious feeling of the teachers. And when they feel better about what they're doing, when they feel more capable of what they're doing, then there's a direct effect on their student development, which is interesting. A project-based learning activity in schools was found to significantly increase students' 21st century skills. Some other research in China looked at a combination of makerspace, so students working on in a practical environment, making things, combined with drama, develop their creativity, cooperation, and problem solving. And the final piece of research I'm going to mention is where a PCK model was used in an integrated STEM context, and that was found to improve students' 21st century skills as well. Typically, when research reports on 21st century skills, they're referring to those four C skills: creativity, cooperation, etc. So let me just talk a little bit about what's unique about STEM. I think if we're going to promote STEM, then there has to be something unique to it. And all that research that I've just talked about, you could set up school activities and a research framework wherein you develop those abilities in science or in history or other areas. So STEM isn't unique really in its ability to develop those particular skills and attributes in students. So we really have to, if we're going to promote STEM, we really have to ask the question, what's unique about it? If you can develop those student skills in other areas, then why promote it? So this is a list of some areas which have been promoted as unique about changing STEM, so about implementing STEM. So changing students' attitudes towards STEM, well, there's some research that indicates you can do that in science. By positive science experiences, you can change students' attitudes towards science, for example. Influencing career decisions is one of the goals of STEM, but you can do that in areas other than STEM. Implementing inquiry, design, and engineering processes is often a goal of STEM, but inquiry you can implement in science, design you can implement in technology. The correlation between technology and engineering is strong. So really you don't need STEM to achieve that goal. Developing particular ways of thinking, maybe, but not convincingly. We need STEM for that. Partnering with industry is often an aspect of STEM education, but schools have a history of doing that in a whole range of curriculum areas. Action learning, it's a characteristic of STEM, is of course learning by doing. Action learning, students learn through projects or solving problems or conducting inquiries. But that's not unique to STEM. Technology, engineering, science, all implement action learning. Project or problem-based learning is often a pedagogical methodology of STEM, but it's also in other areas. STEM is also often associated with high tech. You see a STEM maker space, it'll often have laser cutters or 3D printers or sort of high tech equipment in that context. But again, it's not unique to STEM. So we have to say that none of these areas really provides us justification for the uniqueness of STEM. So we come back to the question, what is it that's unique about STEM? And I think there's one particular area that's important, and it's related to this graph, which I made up, so there's no reference to it, so you can critique it as much as you like. Going from left to right is going from preschool to work. So this is a track of an individual's experience from early childhood into the world of work. And the vertical axis is the level of separation or integration of disciplines. So on the left-hand side at preschool, we experience an integrated approach to learning. So in kindergarten or early elementary schools, students don't and teachers don't differentiate between particular disciplines. Students are just doing stuff. They're learning by making, experimenting, experiencing new things. However, as we track through school, the discipline experience becomes increasingly separated until we get to this barrier at upper secondary where our students typically sit exams in independent disciplines. So the whole curriculum in 11 and 12 is oriented towards that kind of exam approach. Fortunately, that's changing a little bit, and I know it's being discussed in New Zealand as well as universities in Australia, that there are developing alternative pathways into universities other than those strictly discipline exams. Then when a student moves to university, they're working in areas, but not so strictly discipline. So even engineering, which is a discipline, they're sort of doing a lot of science and maths in that. So we're coming back up from the separation of disciplines to more of an integrated approach. And then, of course, the majority of us, when we begin working, we're back to where we started from in preschool. We're back to that more of a disciplinary integrated approach. I think what STEM can do is this. It can lessen that movement from integration to separation. It's a real barrier at upper secondary, but it's changing slowly. And I think that's one of the unique contributions related to STEM. Of course, there's a lot of unpacking you can do with that simple graph in terms of what that means for the curriculum, what it means for pedagogy, what it means for individual development, and a whole lot of other factors. But nevertheless, I think that's one of the unique aspects of STEM. So to summarize, STEM can provide an holistic approach to the real world, and we don't get that at school in an individual disciplinary approach, and students really do need it. They need that holistic approach. The development of important skills in a contemporary context. So STEM provides us with a relevant context. So it's one of the characteristics of STEM. Students must be working in a context that's relevant to them, solving problems that are relevant to them, not to the curriculum necessarily, and they're developing a whole range of skills while they're doing that. Explaining both the natural and the designed world. I mean, in school, we tend to, and this is part of the separation of disciplines, we tend to explain the natural world in one area of the curriculum, and then we move to the designed world in engineering and technology in another area of the curriculum. So integrating that, which of course in reality is a completely thorough integration, is another important element of STEM, and providing a structure for the integration of a desirable education. So STEM is no more than that, really, just providing a structure for that integration. So I hope that I've indicated that there are verified and research-based links between STEM approaches to education and the development. I'm going back here to 21st century skills again. So I think there is a link there, which is clear. But we need to focus on verifying our claims through research. Lots of claims are made about STEM which are not verified. Less so as time goes on and more research is developed, but it's important to keep that in mind, and a focus on the student. As educators, that's our primary focus. Whereas, of course, we do need to pay attention to the broader socioeconomic and curriculum goals. Okay, so those are the references that I used, and I can pass those on if you're interested, and that's my contacts. So I hope that was interesting and relevant to at least some of you. I know it was oriented more towards schooling, but all our students at university, that's where they come from. So it's important to understand, I think, these elements. So I think we've got a few minutes left, Nung, for some discussion. Maybe I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, John. I found this really fascinating. Thank you so much.
Well, it's nice of you to say that.
So now let's open the floor for some question and discussion and comment. Feel free to unmute yourself to talk, or you can send the question to the chat area. While I'm waiting for people to thinking about question and comment, I think I have one question, John. I can see that there are, many ways to enhance student interest through on STEM education, as you mentioned in the presentation. And like you work a lot with Southeast Asian country or East Asian country, and you can see that over there from schools, students really interested in STEM education. While here we in New Zealand and Australia, they seem to sort of, and we sit in the cafe and years ago talking like people should love physics because it's the most beautiful subject in the world, and I'm being very biased, I know. So how can we as educator can increase student interest in STEM subjects?
Yeah, I don't actually think it's very difficult to do that, because students very readily become engaged in two elements of STEM. One is a focus on solving problems that they're interested in, solving problems that are relevant for them. I mean, so much of their schooling is sort of more curriculum oriented and teacher oriented pedagogy. So if we can make that shift to classroom activities that are centered around things that they're interested in, and secondly, our pedagogy supports action learning. So whatever that might be, a project-based approach or solving a problem or conducting an inquiry, but actively involved in the learning. I think satisfying those two criteria, students are quite readily going to become engaged. And because of that, we can therefore achieve some of those sort of higher level change in attitude, consideration of a career in STEM, whereas maybe they hadn't considered it before, because of an interesting school experience. The part of the problem in Australia is our crowded curriculum, and New Zealand as well, I think. In Australia, we have even more of a focus in primary school on literacy and numeracy than New Zealand does. Schools are tested every year on literacy and numeracy at grade 4 and grade 7. So teachers are really focused on their students doing well in those tests. And it's unfortunate that sort of everything else is taught in the afternoon or on Fridays. So, yeah. But it's interesting, the developments in Asia, which in some senses are more advanced in the STEM areas than Australia and New Zealand. And it's particularly interesting, I find, because their traditional pedagogy is less conducive to a STEM approach than it is to a traditional approach. So, that developing phenomena is quite interesting.
Yeah, like some years ago, Chokchai, professor from Thailand, and he went to Vietnam to learn how people in Vietnam teach like science and physics so that they score in PISA are so high. And he was so surprised that he couldn't find any extremely contemporary way of teaching so that can boost the score like that.
Yeah.
Claudius, you have questions?
Yes. Thank you, John, for your presentation. That was really interesting.
Okay.
Question is, what's the main critique STEM gets normally? And my question points to STEAM, including the arts, and also I've heard from some people, even STEAM can have a tendency of discriminating people in the sense of, what if I don't fall in any of the letters? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, there's a couple of issues in your question. I think one is the inclusion of other areas, like, and there's so many variations of STEM, to include, the arts or medicine or design or history or, everything. My response is that, well, if you're going to broaden it out to include other curriculum areas, you might as well just talk about an integrated curriculum, because that's what it is. So I don't even like the inclusion of arts. Not that I've got anything against the arts. I mean, my wife is an artist, so I have to be very careful. But I think, people say, well, it's good to include the arts so we can include design and more sort of artistic development. But if you want that, then it's there within, design is really foundational in technology and engineering. So you're not really gaining much, I think. So my response is either STEM, or if you want to go broader, just call it good integrated education, which of course has been around for a long time. The idea of integrating the curriculum areas. So that was just one part of your question. What was the other part?
So if we keep to STEM and the idea is to integrate in some ways, what if someone, a student, a learner, does not fall within any of the...
Sure. Yeah. Well, this is why I think the most appropriate place for STEM is at primary and middle school, because there you can argue that STEM is important for everybody. So it's not a vocational or pre-vocational type of study. It's a study which develops skills which are important regardless of the profession that you pursue in the future. So, even if you do become an artist, and that is your work, that's your profession, those skills we were talking about, those 21st century skills, they're still relevant to that profession. So my conceptualization and rationalization of STEM is that it's an important component of general education, not vocational education. So everybody needs it. That's my response. Of course, that argument becomes a little bit complex at upper secondary, and whether that argument's relevant at tertiary, I'm not sure, because by then, we're into that specialization. But certainly at primary and middle secondary school, these are skills. This is an activity that everyone needs.
Thank you.
Well, it must have been quite clear, Nung.
Yes, I'm sure. So I have 100 questions, but there's just like a few minutes left. Delaney, would you like to add something or ask a question?
I don't have a question, John. I really enjoyed your talk, and I think while just thinking about what I'm looking at is a graduate profile of a program that we are looking at. So I can see that, reflecting on what you said and then what I'm looking at, I can see that while specialized knowledge is important, subject knowledge is important, but we can't emphasize enough the importance of those skills. So that the skills, particularly when we think about employability, so universities are placing a huge importance on employability, good graduate outcomes. So it's just a comment that it reiterates the importance of the skills. Everyone needs to have those skills. Looking at the future, that's it.
Yeah, and I think something that's possibly changed in society more recently is the idea that no one stays in one profession for their whole working life. There is a more rapid transition from job to job. And so again, those types of skills, they're relevant for all professions.
Absolutely.
So in terms of the school providing a solid basis for whatever a student does in their employability, it's relevant. Yeah, so that's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, John, for a very insightful talk. And I think it's really resonant with me about the employability, the international competitiveness from the larger scale, and how we focus on personalized development for students, and focus on their personal attribute and their transverse or 21st century skill. And we normally talk about, critical thinking skill, creativity, the 4C1, or yes, self-regulation, which is a very good indicator for success. And now in the new world of COVID and everything, we can see the resilience, empathy, hope, and optimism is more important than ever. And I think it's so important that we focus on those skills, the attribute for the future world. So thank you so much, John, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Listen to John and facilitate, participant in the discussion. We will send out the recording later in the email, and feel free to share with your college if you like. Yeah. Please join me to thanks John by clapping.
Thanks very much, Nung, and it's really nice to see my former colleagues again. All the best, and thanks for your involvement and your attention.